So next up, again, one of the great pioneers of really embracing and empowering home studio people, all the way from Nashville, Tennessee, we have Joe Gilder.
Thanks, Ronan. I really look forward to meeting these four guys you were talking about. That sounds awesome. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm Joe Gilder from HomeStudioCorner.com. It's just kind of fun to say that in public. Really glad you came to spend your day with us. Real quick, just because I haven't seen you all yet, you're a fairly good-looking bunch. Raise your hand. How many people in here do audio? It's kind of a dumb question. And of those people, how many are also musicians? There were somehow more hands than before. And of those, so for those of you, that was everybody. And of those, how many also songwriters? Oh, wow, okay. So that was pretty much everybody. So yeah, good, that's me too. I'm also a musician and a songwriter, engineer, and professional disc golf player. So, I'm kidding, I'm not good at it at all. So today I want to talk about, you're gonna hear a lot of great things today. This morning we've got great people like Ian and Graham and Ronan, and this afternoon we've got some awesome folks coming in to do different interviews and panels. So you're gonna hear a lot of technique, a lot of strategy, a lot of good stuff that's gonna make you wanna leave and go to your studio and try. Like every one of you wants to go try the 1dB thing now, I'm fairly certain. I kind of wanted to too, but I'm going to stay and do this first. So while all that's really good, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, I want to learn all that stuff too, there's a piece of the puzzle that I want to address to hopefully help you take all this good stuff you're going to learn and really have an impact with it, as opposed to a great notebook full of cool notes that never translates to anything. So what I want to talk about today is how to have golden ears. Have you ever heard the phrase golden ears? Oh, that guy's got golden ears. Anybody? Okay, for a second there I thought I'd have to change the whole name. So you hear somebody who seems to be able to hear things well, he's got a good ear for audio or mixing or recording, and you say he has golden ears. And it tends to be this idea that he was born that way. He was born with, literal golden ears. And you just assume that's just how it is. Now, I think there's a level of the way your ears work, maybe you're a little more predisposed to being good with music and audio and technical things, but I don't think it's nearly as much of a thing you're born with as we tend to believe. I like to think about it, and I encourage you, the more you think about audio can be a really nerdy topic. I mean, you can push your glasses up and just go to town nerding out on dBs, I'm kidding, and all these other things, and it's good, because we have to get the music to translate, but it's really easy to miss the music part of it. So when I think about audio and engineering and all this stuff, I try to think of it more in terms of playing guitar than in terms of doing engineering. So nobody here was born playing an instrument, right? We all, at some point, I didn't know how to sing, I didn't know how to play guitar or piano. And over the years, I learned that through learning techniques and building on it, right? It's really simple. You would think I'm stupid if I said he was a born guitar player, because you know what that means. He developed that skill. But for some reason, we think of listening as being something you either have or you don't. I've done workshops and events before where I'll say, hear how that vocal sounds kind of harsh, we're going to go in and fix that. And invariably, somebody will stop and say, well, how did you know? How'd you know that sounded harsh? What were you listening for? How did you get there? And they kind of walk away thinking, oh, he just knew. I don't have that just know thing that Joe has, so I can't do mixing anymore. And it's completely not true. So I'm going to go through a few different things that I think will be helpful for you, different techniques and skills to develop to get yourself closer to golden ear status. Does that sound good? Good idea? Good idea? Okay. I'm going to need more feedback from you. Yeah! Or I'm walking. Okay? Great. So, a couple different things. So the idea here is you don't have to get to the point of being an Ian Shepherd who can hear everything. Everything. He's mastered a few of my albums, and I send them off with fear as I click the send button, because it's like, now he's going to hear it. And he's going to say things, but he's generally complimentary, and I don't know if that's just the polite bred in him or what, but you don't, the goal isn't to get to the point where you're this super impressive hearer, just like I'm never going to be an Eric Clapton, but I can become a better guitarist, I can become better at my craft, and in my domain of what I do, I can really improve my skill to help me and my clients and people that I work with. So that's my goal for you. I don't want you to be Ian, although that's pretty good thing to aspire to, but you don't have to. So the first thing we'll talk about is, and this is something, we were talking about this at breakfast this morning when Ian was just pounding some pancakes, because he doesn't get to come to the US very often. And it's this idea of you may see a video, like, who watches like Pensado's Place, right? Awesome, incredible. And he'll pull up a mix and he'll play you the raw tracks, for example, and you'll hear it and say, well, that already sounds really good. No wonder he's a great mix engineer. The tracks already sound good. Who's guilty of saying that? Right? And you think, now I'm going to go back to my crappy tracks and really get to work. And you miss that connection, right? If his mixes sound amazing and he's working with tracks that sound amazing, I'm not saying he's not gifted. He's a very talented mixer, but he's starting from a good place, right? So I've said this all the time. It's kind of my catchphrase with a really stupid acronym, but get it right at the source, which is GIRATS. See, doesn't that just flow right off the top? It doesn't. I'm not good with the gimmicks. And so that idea, it's easy to say, but people don't tend to take that to heart. And so what I want to talk about is things along that line, but some specific things. So the first thing is you've got to develop the ability to recognize a crappy song, because there's no amount of voodoo that you can do. You can't go get all the gear that's out there on that back table and set it up perfectly and do all the technique stuff. If it's a crappy song, what do you end up at the end with? A crappy song, right? And so, yes, we can all say we've heard crappy songs that have good production around them. Yes. But why would you do that? Why do that as opposed to a good song that also has good performances, good production, good recording, good mixing, good mastering? And then you just upload it to Lander for the mastering stage, and it's great. It's a joke. It's a complete joke. It's a joke. If you don't know what it is, good. I'm not going to tell you. So that's the first thing, is you've got to be able to ditch bad songs. And if it's your own music, that's painful, right? And you're thinking, man, Paul McCartney just knew how great I was. And then invariably, like, how many times has this happened? You've written a song, you've gotten so excited, you start recording, you get halfway through the process, and you get bored with it. And you think, oh, this song's lame. I don't even like it. That's normal, but I think we need to develop that skill of moving past that. Maybe letting the song live for another day or two before recording it to see if it's even worth our time. Because production's a long process, especially if you're in a home studio and you're not in there every day. It can take a while to have the time to do everything you need to do. Why not invest that time on good music and good songs? So the way I go about this, you may remember a couple of years ago, I wanted to release a new album. So I decided if I'm going to release a 10 or so song album, I want 10 or so good songs. So I'm going to write 50, and then maybe 20% of those will be good, which is 10. Now, you may think that's stupid, and a lot of people thought that was stupid and probably still do. And they would get all upset, like, you're turning the creative process into a factory. You can't. I'm like, well, why do you care what I'm doing with my music, first of all? And secondly, the process worked really well. I ended up writing 50 songs in 12 weeks, and that was the goal, write one per day, weekday, nice and easy. Well, I waited till the last 2 weeks to write the final 27. I really tried. I didn't try. But then I got to this point and said, I either have to do this or I have to tell everybody that I told I was going to write 50 songs, that I didn't write those 50 songs. So in that 2-week period, there were a couple days where I wrote 4 songs in a morning, and I was just blowing through them. Here's an idea about a turtle. Let's go. Let's roll with that. So I didn't ditch any bad ideas because I had to get through. And what's interesting is that album, which was an album called Better This Way, there's 13 songs on there. 8 of those songs were written in that last 2-week period, where I was just like, 2 were written on one of those 4-song-a-day days, where I was just blowing through stuff. So I'm not saying that technique has to work for you. That just, for some reason, worked for me. But that idea of, that was 3 months of my life that I wasn't recording, I wasn't mixing, I wasn't doing anything else moving towards this project. But I ended up, a few months later, with an album I'm really proud of because I put that effort in on the very front end of the very beginning of the whole process as a song. And I made sure I had songs that I was proud of, that I lived with for a little while, and that I wanted to take to fruition. Does that make sense? So we can't go, you can jump into it, and I get that, but I think if you're, especially seeing all the hands that raise that are musicians and songwriters and artists, it's really important. And I know this is an engineering thing, we're audio bloggers, but we're audio bloggers because we love music. And the better you can make your songs, the better the whole rest of the process is going to go. So the next skill you need to develop, aside from knowing when to ditch bad songs, is knowing when to ditch bad performances. You can have a great song, and if the performance is just so distracting, it kills everything, right? For some reason, so I have a VIP membership that I do, and I do critiques for my members pretty regularly. And there are some songs that come in, and they're technically okay, but things like the guitars are out of tune. And to me as a guitarist, it just blows my mind. How does it get that far before noticing it? I'm not, if you just don't have an ear for that, that's fine. That means you need to be more vigilant with the Mr. Tuner. But the idea of, they're wondering why the guitars sound thin, or why the guitars sound muddy, or why they don't sound right. And I say, it's because they're out of tune. And they don't want to hear that, because that means I've got to go redo something, or I did something wrong here. But no amount of trickery over here. I mean, Ian's working on the Tune Your Guitar plugin, but until that's released, we're going to have to actually record in tune guitars. So I know that seems obvious, but you've been in those sessions where you have a million things on your mind. The guitar sounds okay, so you just go through and lay it down. Your ears just aren't listening for it. So we have to be able to program ourselves to stop, because that's really the most important part. Graham and I have talked about this a lot. The more time you spend on that front end getting all this stuff right, the back end suddenly becomes a lot easier. You're not spending as much time wrestling with those guitars because you made them sound really good on the front end. Okay? Make sense? You with me?
Woo!
Yeah? Good. Got some thumbs in the back. Thanks in the back. Ooh, double thumbs. Excellent. Okay. So we're ditching bad songs. We're ditching bad performances. The next thing we got to do is actually finish something. Now, who here has finished some sort of song project in the last 6 months? Let's say since the fall. Yes. Keep the hands up. Everybody look around. Look at all these people who have finished projects and released them. That's awesome. You don't need to hear this, so just take a little break. For those of you who struggle to finish things, and I do too, that to me is, for the guys who are going to be up here later, they're doing projects day in and day out. They've got major label releases and all this really cool stuff. So their finishing isn't something I have to, you really should finish your projects. They get that. But for us home studio folks, it's really, life gets in the way. We want to try out that new plugin. We want to try that new technique we learned about. And we just use our projects as like a training ground to get better. But we forget, well, why did we get into recording in the first place? It was to make and release music and get it out there to the world. So always when I'm working on something, there's an end date to it. It has to finish. I did this challenge last fall, and you were in on it, this EP challenge that we're going to release an EP in 3 months. So me and a brave small group of people all worked on working something towards finishing it. And so that idea of finishing is so important because it forces you to focus, there we go, and to really focus on what matters, right? So if you know you've got to start mixing next week for this song, you're probably not going to spend 10 hours figuring out that little noodly guitar part that you're going to turn down in the mix anyway, right? You're going to focus on the bigger picture stuff. So it's almost a push and pull of recording stuff that's quality, but also moving towards a finish line. Otherwise, you end up with, what's the Chinese democracy? How long did that take to finish?
Years. 10 years?
I think it was like 19. I'm going to double you, 19. Way more than it should have to finish a project, right? So always, whatever you're working on, put an end date on it. You can miss your end date, that's fine. But I guarantee having that end date, this deadline, is going to make you get way more done between now and then than if you didn't. I've heard it said before, if you want to set a goal, why not set a really big one? So if you want to set a goal to make $1 million this year, and everyone says, oh, that's not reasonable, don't set a reasonable goal. Well, what if you miss your goal by half of $1 million? That's still a pretty good day, right? So, and I know that gets into semantics, but the idea of why not have a goal of getting this album done in a month, you work your butt off, you don't release it, guess what? You're a lot closer to releasing that album versus I want to get it done sometime in this decade. Then you will get done. It'll be around 2019. You'll be wrapping things up. Because what's that thing, Graham? You talk about it all the time. The thing expands to fill the
Parkinson's
thing.
law.
Parkinson's
law.
Which is?
That the perceived value of something will expand with the amount of time you give it. So if you give it a lot of time, you'll take a lot of time.
If you give it 10 years, it'll take you 10 years. So that's my point, is always be working towards finishing. And a lot of people kind of get kind of angry at that because they think this is my art. If it takes me 10 years, it's my art. And that's fine. But if your art is so good, the world needs to hear it. And you need to get it out there. Seth Godin talks about shipping stuff, getting it out and actually where someone could buy it or just download it or listen to it. That's really what I think we should be focusing on. Does that make sense? Any questions so far?
Yeah.
Any questions so far? Any questions so far? Okay, there's one over there.
You pay attention to Seth a lot?
Off and on, I'm kind of easing back into a Seth kick. I like Seth. If you haven't read any Seth Godin stuff, it'll get you fired up as an artist. Go read Icarus Deception. It's a good book. It's a little weird too. Let me think. Okay. So the next thing we'll talk about is how it's really important. If you're going to develop these golden ears, obviously you have to develop, and we talked about this on the most recent Symphony Recording Podcast episode, you have to develop an ear for what does sound good. Now, I know that seems obvious, but have you ever heard of the analogy of the way the people who, whatever the people are, who find and recognize counterfeit money? So they're the ones who look at bills to decide if they're counterfeit. Well, they spend all their time studying the real thing. They study the real $100 bill. So when a fake comes across their desk, they can say, oh, that's obviously a fake. I'm so used to the real thing, I notice a fake right off the bat. Well, you got to do the same thing with music and audio. You've got to be listening to stuff that you deem as good. I can't tell you what's good for you. But whatever your favorite albums are that seem to be in that's the same genre of what you're working on, you've got to know what that sounds like on your system at your normal listening level. Because otherwise, when your stuff comes out of those speakers, you have no gauge for that. And we all know it's really hard to know, am I even remotely in the realm of what everyone else does? And to do that, having something like a list of favorite albums or a playlist in iTunes that you regularly listen to will be really helpful, because you'll hear what good stuff sounds like on your system. So then you know, A, that it's possible for your system to make good sounds because you hear them coming out of it. And then you can at least know, now I'm going to work towards that. And so that's the idea of not so much a reference track while you're mixing to flip over to. I'm all for that. I'm bad at doing that. But more so just taking time to actually just do some listening in your environment where you're really soaking in the stuff that you deem appropriate. And the side effect of that is you're going to develop a taste, right? When you played that song, you thought the second one sounded more radio friendly, and other people thought that it was kind of cool how it was split. Other people thought the first one sounded better. Well, there's no right or wrong. It's simply, that's kind of how you prefer to listen to stuff. I prefer, like, who in here is a member of Dueling Mixes? Any Dueling Mixes members? Yeah, we need to all hang out later. Graham and I mix the same song each month, and it could not sound more different every month. This month especially. I'm listening, I'm just like, how did we even get there? And is it because he uses different technique than me? Yes and no. Is it because he uses different plugins than me? Yes and no. It's because he is a person who hears things differently than I do. He has a different musical history of songs that he really likes, albums that he really connects to, things that when he hears them, he says, that sounds good to me. I have a different group of those, so that's going to inform how I do what I do. Yes, we may use the same basic approach to using an EQ and a compressor, but I'm using it with an ear towards this sound in my head that I'm trying to achieve. So it's not about, I really love the sound of parallel compression. No, it's, I really love this drum sound, right? What's the old Massenburg quote? Nobody ever leaves a concert humming the console. They're humming the song, right? So nobody's gonna, in 10 years when you've, double platinum on that album, they're not gonna come in and be like, man, the way you sent those drums to those two drum buses just really spoke to me on an emotional level. They're not, right? They're gonna say, dude, those drums are awesome. Or they might just say, dude, that song was awesome, or dude, you're awesome. So the stuff's important, right? You're here because you want to get better at this craft. You want to get better at using those tools. But ultimately, it's up to you and what your taste is. So I'm all for listening and getting opinions and feedback, but ultimately, I want to make music that I'm really happy with and I'm proud of. So there have been, this is embarrassing confession time, there have been months inside of Dueling Mixes where we compete every month. It's mostly friendly competition. And where we've done one of my songs, and then I'll mix it, Graham will mix it. And there have been multiple months where everyone's voted for his mix of my song over mine. Makes me a little angry.
Love you, Joe.
Yeah, he loves me. I'm sure you do. And so there's this moment of what's happening, where the world's coming to an end. I must suck at this. And it's just Graham hears mine came out the way I wanted it to sound. Graham heard it, and he had a different vision of where to go. And his vision connected with more people than mine did. Does that make sense? So it's not that his was right, and mine was wrong. This would have worked a lot better if it came from the other perspective, where they voted for mine, but Graham, you're still good too. But you get what I'm saying? It sounds like I'm just trying to justify myself. But I really try to get to a point where I could play this for somebody and be proud of it. And hopefully, that connects with a lot of people. We all know there are different bands, like for whatever reason, there's this band from a few decades ago called the Beatles, and they, for whatever reason, connected with a lot of people over insert another band that's more obscure that people like to say they know because nobody knows them. So it's all about your personal preference. It's just what you like. And then learning just the bare minimum enough of how to use the tools to achieve that sound, and then that's you. And I think we go too far in the direction of, I want to know how to get Graham Cochran's drum sound. It's like, well, if that's the sound you really want, yes, but otherwise, work on this drum sound that you want. You know, don't write songs to sound just like somebody else. Write whatever music was in you that's supposed to be coming out. And that's why I love talking about this stuff. I can go on about EQs and delays and reverbs and compressors and all that stuff, and we can do that if you want. But I love if I could bring it back around to, man, I love music. I want to make really good music that connects with people and makes them either cry or dance. One of the two. Those are my goals in all of my music. So that's what I'm thinking. That's how I think you can develop and work towards having ears that hear things that maybe you didn't hear before. And hopefully you'll email me in a year from now and say, hey, I was just listening to something with somebody else and I pointed out some stuff in the mix and they were like, dude, you have golden ears. And you can say, Joe Gilder. Okay? That's the goal. Thanks for listening. We got time for questions, I think. I don't have a watch.
Periscope, if you have questions, message me.
The reason people like Graham's mix was nothing to do with you or Graham, except for the fact that music is communication, and he was being communicated to by you. And so he had the feeling, the emotion inside as he was mixing. But when you do your, I'm not trying to make a statement out of this, I really want you to try to answer it. But when you do your own mixing, you are connected to yourself without the outside communication that music is.
So did y'all hear that? Try to summarize. He wonders if the reason people like Graham's mixes of my song is because he was connecting with the song as a listener while also working on the music. Did I connect with you, Graham, on an emotional level?
It was beautiful.
Which one did you do? Did you laugh or cry?
I don't do either of those ever.
Well, I'm really speaking to the people who have hearts. If you're dead inside, I can't help you, so go buy a plug-in or something. Any other? I don't know if that answered. We can talk about that. I think it's a cool idea. I have no idea what the answer is, though. Yes?
Yeah, you asked how many of us are musicians, and I think a lot of us started recording to record our own stuff because we were poor.
Poor musicians, hang on. There's a hand for all the poor musicians. Yes. Love it.
How do you balance your desire for control over the composition for achieving your vision with maintaining more objective listening? Because this is just piggybacking on what you're talking about at this point.
Mainly for your own stuff?
Do you think you shouldn't produce your own music if you're a singer-songwriter?
I think that you can make a good argument for not producing your own stuff. But we come back around to the poor musician part. So, kind of like we were talking last night, there was an era, of making records where every part of the process was there was a guy for this, there was a producer, there was an engineer, there was a this, there was a that, there was a guitar player. All he did was play guitar. Now that's you. You're the engineer, producer, guitar player, gear buyer, schedule maker, coffee maker, like you do all those things. And it's a necessary evil. It's great that we actually even have ability to do that, right? But I think for me, getting a lot of outside opinions, that was one thing I didn't talk about quite as much, but I'm not big on being beholden to what someone else thinks of my music, because ultimately I've got to make music I want to make. But when I wrote those 50 songs, I originally wrote them all down, and then I said, I'm going to put a check mark next to the ones that need to go on an album. I put check marks next to 34 songs. I was that smitten with my music. And so then I sent them all to my wife and my bass player, and they just hacked them down. I thought I had 2 albums worth of music. And they said, you got maybe 1. So those were the 13 songs that made it. So yeah, I think getting outside feedback and working with other musicians is big for me too. If I'm playing everything, it gets really the same really quick. It's like, oh, you played that same riff on 4 different instruments. That's impressive. So those are some things I used to combat it, and I think just developing that objectively listening to other things, to hear what they did, to kind of inform and force yourself to try to at least listen objectively to your own stuff. I think we have time for maybe one more.
What was the name of that book? Sorry.
What was the name of what?
That book that you mentioned about something.
The Icarus Deception. Icarus, like the wax wing fell in the ocean, horrible story. Yeah, great book.
And The Dip.
Yes?
The Dip is a great.
And The Dip. Tobacco. Hat in the back.
So when you're mixing
Definitely get their opinion, and sometimes if I'm mixing for people, they'll send me their rough mix of kind of what they heard, and that's usually helpful because I'll hear, oh, they like drums around here, and they like that vocal with some delay, but then everything else is pretty bad. And so I try to keep those things in mind, but generally I try to do my thing, pretend like I'm a part of the band, trying to make this something I'm going to release, and then give it to them. And a lot of times I may come up with something they didn't think of, but they end up really liking it. And then sometimes they'll say, hey, I don't like what you did there. Can you go back and make it this way? And it's a push and pull. I've been lucky not to have to work with people who kind of just leave it to me and say, do your thing, as long as I don't hate it, I'm good. But there's so much. We're professional, like psychologists too, add to the list of things that we have to do in the studio. So if you got a super opinionated group, I probably wouldn't have them there while you're mixing. I would at least have this be like, get out, let me do my thing, and then you can bash it later. But some process like that I think would work well. Good question, Ben. All right, I'm out of time. Thank y'all so much for coming out. Have fun.
All right, Joe Gilder, everybody. Thank you so much.